Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Raimundo Rios Mayo Library in Arkansas. Welcome to Strange Things. I'm your host, Chris James. This is Saturday the 13th. If you listened to last week's show, you might catch what that means. Saturday the 13th is kind of associated with Friday the 13th. Tonight, we're going to be talking about one of the most incredible humans to ever be born and grow up in the United States. Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet. He was born March 18th, 1877. He passed on January 3rd, 1945. Edgar was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Actually, a little town just south of there. He was one of 6 children of Leslie B. Cayce and Carrie Cayce. He was a very spiritual child. He played with the little folk, as he called them, and sometimes he said he saw his deceased grandfather. He regarded them all as otherworldly because he said he could see through them if he looked hard enough. He found it very difficult to keep his mind on his lessons at school. At least I have one thing in common with him. Cayce began to read the Bible when he was 10 years old, becoming engrossed and reading it from cover to cover a dozen times by age 12. In May 1889, while reading the Bible in his hut in the woods, he saw a woman with wings who told him that his prayers had been answered, and asked him what he wanted most of all. Edgar was frightened, but he said that most of all he wanted to be helpful to others, especially sick children. He said he'd like to be a missionary. Well, the next night, after a complaint from the school teacher, his father got after him for spelling. Well, that's 2 things we had in common. His dad eventually getting a bit, actually very mad with exasperation. At that point, Edgar heard a voice of the lady who had appeared to him. She told him if he could sleep just a little bit, they could help him. He begged for rest and put his head down on the table, using the spelling book as a pillow. When his father came back into the room and woke him up, he knew all the answers in the book. In fact, he could repeat anything in the book. His father thought he'd been fooling before, only pretending to have trouble with spelling. Eventually, Edgar got in the habit of sleeping with a book under his head, absorbing the information through osmosis. I tried this once, but I think the book was upside down, and I woke up not knowing as much as when I fell asleep. By 1892, the teacher regarded Edgar as one of his best students. When being questioned, Edgar told the teacher he saw pictures of the pages in the books. His father became quite proud of this accomplishment and spread it around, resulting in Edgar becoming viewed as somewhat different from his classmates. If you can imagine, your dad is telling everyone you can absorb a book in your sleep, would that set you apart from your friends? Shortly after this, Edgar exhibited an ability to diagnose in his sleep. While playing at the school, he'd been hit in the back with a baseball, causing extreme pain that lasted for an incredible length of time. He also began to have some difficulties from this blow, both mental and physical. This led to his being bedridden for quite a time. He went to sleep, and during his slumber, a diagnosis for a cure came to him, which his family prepared and which surprisingly cured him as he slept. His father boasted that his son was the greatest fellow in the world when he's asleep. However, this ability was not demonstrated again for several years. Edgar's uncommon personality is also shown by this unusual ability he had. He was able to ride a certain mule. This stunned everyone because the mule could not be ridden by anyone, including its owner. The owner, thinking perhaps the mule had finally given in, tried riding the creature once more and was immediately thrown to the ground. As it turned out, Edgar had a strange attachment to animals, and he was able to work with them when nobody else could. December 1893, the Cayce family moved to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and moved into 705 West 7th on the southeast corner of 7th and Young Street. During this time, Cayce went to the 8th grade and began to develop his psychic abilities. He left the family farm to pursue various forms of employment at 16. Now, keep in mind, this was back in the 1800s. Kids went to work at a much earlier age. Very few people were expected to go to college, and especially if you didn't have any money. And back then, if you didn't have a job by the time you were 16, well, there was something wrong with you. Cayce's education stopped in the 9th grade because his family could not afford the cost involved. A 9th grade education was often considered more than sufficient for working-class children. Much of the remainder of Cayce's younger years would be characterized by search for both employment and money, neither of which he had much of. One time, Cayce, while looking for work, stopped by the local stationery store and asked for a job. He really wanted to work at that store. The owners told him they weren't looking for anyone to hire at that time. They were barely making enough money to pay themselves, and they really couldn't afford to hire anyone. Edgar told them if they would let him work for 2 weeks without pay, then they could decide whether they wanted to keep him or not. After 2 weeks, Edgar had improved the store so much he was asked to stay on and offered a very good salary. Throughout his life, Cayce was drawn to church as a member of the Disciples of Christ. He read the Bible once a year every year. He taught Sunday school, and he recruited missionaries. He said he could see an aura around people. He also spoke to angels, and he heard voices of departed relatives. In his early years, he agonized over whether these psychic abilities were from above or below. He could never quite decide. Was it God and the angels telling him what to do, or was it that other guy? In 1900, Cayce formed a business partnership with his dad. They were going to sell insurance. However, in March, he was struck by a severe case of laryngitis that resulted in a complete loss of his voice. If you can't talk, it's kind of difficult to convince people to buy insurance. Unable to work, he lived at home with his parents for almost a year. He then decided that perhaps he should become a photographer, seeing as being a photographer he wouldn't have to speak much. He began an apprenticeship at a photography studio in Hopkinsville and eventually became quite talented in his trade. We're going to take a brief pause now for a few commercials and station identification. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical. 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Can't seem to find one? Well, swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. They have the best coffee on the planet. Not a coffee drinker? They also have hot chocolate with coconut mixed in, hot tea, and other drinks if that's what you'd prefer. On occasion, they'll have sweet rolls and muffins, cookies, and other delicacies. The Organic Man Coffee Shop, it's a great place to bring your friends and have a conversation or sit in a quiet corner and read a book. Swing on by 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. Remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is A.R.E Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando A.R.E Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome back to Strange Things. We'd just been talking about the fact that Edgar Cayce had decided to pursue a career as a photographer. He became quite talented at this, and if you go to the A.R.E headquarters in Virginia Beach, Virginia, they still have a lot of his photographs on display there. His talent was something else. Well, anyway, 1901, a traveling stage hypnotist and an entertainer named Hart was performing at the Hopkinsville Opera House, and Cayce was prompted to go on stage by some of his friends. Surprisingly, while under hypnosis, Cayce was able to speak clearly. An experiment was conducted later at the office of Dr. Manning Brown, the local throat specialist. Cayce's voice returned while under hypnosis, but disappeared upon awakening. Hart tried a post-hypnotic suggestion that the voice would continue to function after the trance, but this proved unsuccessful. Since Hart had appointments in other cities, he couldn't continue his hypnotic treatment of Cayce. A New York hypnotist tried working with him. He found the same impediment, but then suggested that perhaps Cayce should try to take over his own treatment while under hypnosis. The only local hypnosis, Al Lane, offered to help Cayce restore his voice. Lane suggested that Cayce describe the nature of his condition and cure while in a hypnotic trance. Cayce described his own ailment from a first-person, plural point of view. We instead of the singular I. In subsequent sessions, when Cayce wanted to indicate that the connection was made to a person that was requesting a reading, he would generally start off with, "We have the body." According to the reading for the entity of Cayce, his voice loss was due to psychological paralysis and could be corrected by increasing the blood flow to the voice box. Lane suggested that the blood flow be increased, and suddenly Cayce's face became flushed with blood. Both his chest and throat turned dark red. After about 20 minutes, Cayce, still in his trance, declared that the treatment was over. Upon awakening, his voice was back to normal, and it stayed that way. Lane had read of similar hypnotic cures by Marquis de Puysegur, a follower of Franz Mesmer. Now, Franz Mesmer was the guy that originally worked mostly with hypnosis. In fact, hypnosis would be called mesmerism today, if not for the nasty press that Franz got while working with his subjects. You'll still hear the term mesmerized, especially when dealing with rattlesnakes and things like that. The Marquis was keen to explore the limits of healing knowledge, and so they tried working with his suggestions. Cayce's diagnosis Dr. Lane asked Cayce to diagnose him to find out about any of his own ailments and suggest a cure. Lane found the results both accurate and effective. So Lane regarded the ability as clairvoyance. He suggested that Cayce offer his trance healing to the public. And Cayce was a little reluctant as he had no idea what he was prescribing while asleep and whether or not the remedies were safe. He also told Lane he himself did not want to know anything about the patient, as it was not relevant. And Cayce finally agreed on the condition that readings would be free. He began, with Lane's help, to offer free treatments to the townspeople. Lane described Cayce's method as a self-imposed hypnotic trance which induced clairvoyance. Reports of Cayce's work appeared in the newspapers, which inspired many postal inquiries. Cayce stated he would work just as effectively using a letter from the individual as with the person being present in the room. Given only the person's name and location, Cayce said he could diagnose the physical and mental conditions of what he termed the entity and then provide a remedy. On one occasion, the address of the subject was incorrect. This led to Cayce being unable to connect. Once the address had been corrected, the connection to the patient was achieved. It was very important that he knew where the person was. If the location was off, the diagnosis was not accurate. Cayce was still worried, as one dead patient was all he needed to become a murderer. His fiancée, Gertrude, agreed with him. Few people knew what he was up to. There was a common belief at the time that subjects of hypnosis eventually went insane, or at least that their health would suffer. Cayce soon became famous, and people from around the world sought his advice through correspondence. Many people were surprised to learn that Edgar Cayce was a devoted churchgoer and a Sunday school teacher. At a young age, Cayce vowed to read the Bible for every year of his life, and at the time of his death in 1945 he had accomplished this task. Perhaps the readings said it best. When asked how to become a psychic, Cayce's advice was to become more spiritual. In 1902, he invented a card game called Pit, or Board of Trade, that became very popular. But when he sent the idea to a game company, they put their own copyright on it, and he never received a dime for his idea. Cayce finally did marry Gertrude, June 17, 1903. She still disapproved of the readings, and Cayce still agonized over the morality of them. Cayce and Gertrude accepted the resulting publicity as best they could, greatly aided by the diplomacy of a few young doctors. Cayce and a relative finally opened a photographic studio in Bowling Green, while the doctors formed a committee with some colleagues to investigate his unusual ability. All the experiments confirmed the accuracy of the readings. However, Cayce refused a lucrative offer to go into business. After a volatile examination by a doctor while in a trance, Cayce refused any more investigations, declaring he would only do readings for those who needed help and believed in the readings. In 1906, a fire burned down his photography studio, leading him to bankruptcy. His first son was born the following year, March 6, 1907. Edgar became debt-free by 1909, although at that time he was absolutely broke. He was ready to start again, and in 1907, diagnostic success in the family helped his confidence. He again refused any offer to go into business, and this time with a homeopath, a Dr. Wesley Ketchum from Hopkinsville. he was introduced to Cayce by his father. Instead, he found a job at the H.P. Tesler photography firm. Dr. Ketchum was present, spread information in various medical circles, and in October 1910 was written about in the press. When a reporter contacted Cayce, and Cayce explained to the reporter that he somehow had the ability to easily go into an intuitive sleep when he wanted to, and that this was far different from how he went to sleep normally like everyone else. When asked the mechanism of the readings via the sleep method, they were told that it happened via the capabilities of the subconscious mind. Ketchum again urged Cayce to join a business company. After soul-searching the whole night, Cayce finally accepted the offer under certain conditions, including that he did not take money for the readings. Instead, the company was to furnish him with a photographic studio for his livelihood and build a separate office for the readings. The contract was modified to give 50% of the earnings to Cayce and his father. Cayce tried to read the contract, but they contained so many technical terms and so much legalese that he gained no more understanding of what he was doing. He preferred to put the readings on a more scientific basis, but only the doctors in Hopkinsville would cooperate, whereas most of the patients were not in that locality. Also, doctors from all specialties were needed, as the treatments prescribed varied widely. Edgar, and especially Gertrude, still did not give credence to his own readings. This, unfortunately, led to the loss of their second son. Cayce might have been able to come up with a cure had he not doubted his own abilities. Later on, when Gertrude became fatally ill with tuberculosis, they had tried every imaginable cure. When nothing seemed to help, Cayce turned to his readings again. Working with the doctors, using the information that Edgar Cayce was able to come up with, miraculously, the treatment cured her. Shortly after this, 1912, Cayce, whose everyday conscious mind was not aware during the readings, discovered that Dr. Ketchum had not been honest with him. He'd been using some of the readings to gamble. Dr. Ketchum would ask Cayce some questions about a patient. He would get the answers. Then he'd slip in a question such as, which horse is going to win in the afternoon race? Edgar Cayce, having no knowledge of what he was saying, he would tell the doctor, and then the doctor would run off and make money this way. Well, Cayce was not pleased with this, not a tiny bit. Seeing as Cayce had absolutely no memory of anything that the questions or the answers were, he had no way of knowing that this had happened. Well, Cayce quit the company immediately and went back to the Tesler photography firm in Selma, Alabama. And Cayce's work grew in volume as his fame grew. He asked for voluntary donations to support himself and his family so that he could practice full-time. He continued to work in a trance state, but now his wife would stay in the room with him so that no untoward activity would take place and no one would take advantage of his readings. Then they decided to hire a secretary, Gladys Davis, to record the readings. The growing fame of Cayce, along with the popularity he received from newspapers, attracted several eager, commercially minded men who wanted to seek a fortune by using his clairvoyant abilities. Even though Cayce was reluctant to help them, he was persuaded to give his readings, which left him feeling dissatisfied with himself and thoroughly unsuccessful. A cotton merchant offered him $100 a day for his readings about the daily outcome in the cotton market. However, despite his poor finances, Cayce refused the merchant's offer. Some wanted to know where to hunt for treasure, while others wanted to know the outcome of horse races. Several times he was persuaded to give such readings as an experiment. However, when he used his ability for such purposes, he did no better than chance alone would dictate. These experiments made him depleted of energy, distraught, and unsatisfied with himself. Finally, he decided to use his gift only to help the distressed and the sick. In 1923, Arthur Lammers, a wealthy printer and student of metaphysics, persuaded Cayce to give readings on philosophical subjects. Cayce was told by Lammers that while in his trance state, he spoke of Lammers' past lives and of reincarnation, something that Lammers believed in. Well, reincarnation was a popular subject of the day, but not accepted part of the Christian doctrine. Because of this, Cayce questioned his stenographer about what he had said while in his trance state, and remained unconvinced. He challenged Lammers' charge that he had validated astrology and reincarnation in the following dialogue. And Cayce said, "I said all that? I couldn't have said all that in one reading." Lammers, "No, but you confirmed it. You see, I've been studying metaphysics for years, and I was able, by a few questions, by the facts you gave, to check what is right and what is wrong with the whole lot of stuff I've been reading. The important thing is that the basic system, which runs through all the mystery religions, whether they come from Tibet or the pyramids of Egypt, is backed up by you. It's actually the right system." Cayce's stenographer recorded the following. "In this we see the plane of development of those individuals set upon this plane, meaning the ability to enter again into the presence of the Creator and become a full part of that creation." Any time Cayce was in a trance, his speech became somewhat fanciful. You listened to him talking, sometimes you had to stop and try to decipher what it was he said, simply because he didn't sound like himself. He didn't sound like a ninth-grade educated farm boy who had grown up to become a photographer. He almost sounded more like a philosophy major from some big-name university. In this we see the plane of development of those individuals set upon this plane, meaning the ability to enter again into the presence of the Creator and become a full part of that creation. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a ninth-grade education to me. We're going to take a brief pause here for a few commercials and station identification, and we will be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Are you craving a great cup of coffee? Stop on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. They have more than just coffee there. They have hot tea, hot chocolate, and other drinks if you're interested. They also have sweet rolls, cookies, and sometimes muffins. It's a great place to meet your friends for a cup of coffee and quiet conversation, or just sit in a nice corner and read a book. The Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. Plenty of parking at this location. Remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome back. Getting back to some more of Edgar Cayce's unusual speech, here's some other dialogue that he'd had concerning reincarnation. Insofar as this entity is concerned, he was referring to himself, this is the third appearance on this plane, and before this one, as the monk. We see glimpses in the life of the entity now, as were shown in the monk, in this mode of living. The body is only the vehicle, ever of that spirit and soul that wafts through all time and ever remains the same. Cayce was quite unconvinced that he had been referring to the doctrine of reincarnation, and the best Lammers could offer was that the reading opened up the door and to go on to share his beliefs and knowledge with Cayce. Lammers had come to him with quite a bit of information of his own to share with Cayce, and seemed intent upon convincing Edgar now that he felt the readings had confirmed his strongly held beliefs. It should be noted, however, that 12 years earlier, Cayce had briefly alluded to reincarnation. In reading 4841-1, given April 22nd, 1911, Cayce had referred to the soul being transmigrated. Because Cayce's readings were not systematically recorded until 1923, it is possible that he may have mentioned the reincarnation in other readings. Lammers asked Cayce to come to Dayton to pursue metaphysical truth via the readings. Cayce eventually agreed and went to Dayton. Gertrude was dubious, but still interested. Much metaphysical information was forthcoming, which Cayce reconciled with Christianity. Lammers declared that the 5th chapter of Matthew was the constitution of Christianity, and the Sermon on the Mount was its declaration of independence. It appears that Cayce's subconscious mind was as much at home with the language of metaphysics as it was with the language of anatomy and medicine. Cayce reported that his conscience bothered him severely over this conflict. His readings of reincarnation were going against his biblical teachings, and at one point he wanted to cease his channeling sessions altogether. Once again, Cayce lost his voice, and in a reading for himself, he was informed that if he was no longer going to be channeling, his mission in this life was complete. Ultimately, his trance voice, the we of the readings, dialogued with Cayce and finally persuaded him to continue with these kinds of readings. He was arguing with himself, in a way. It's almost as if Cayce wasn't so much in a trance. It was as if he was being possessed by another entity. Lammers wanted to ask the readings the purpose of Cayce's clairvoyance and to put up money for an organization supporting Cayce's healing methods. And Cayce decided to accept the work and asked his family to join him in Dayton as soon as they could. Unfortunately, by the time the Cayces had arrived there, near the end of 1923, Lammers found himself in financial difficulties and could be of no use. Cayce used his knowledge of the Bible to convince his family that it agreed with reincarnation and other metaphysical teachings. It was at this time Cayce directed his activity to provide readings centered on health. The remedies that were channeled often involved the use of unusual electrotherapy, ultraviolet light, diet, massage, gemstones, less mental work, and more relaxation in the sand on the beach. One reading involved a patient who was having severe difficulties. While Edgar Cayce was in his trance state, he recommended that the patient go to the pharmacist and obtain something called the oil of smoke. Well, once Cayce came out of the trance and the information had been passed to the subject, the man was unable to find the cure. The pharmacist had no idea what oil of smoke was. Well, they requested Edgar do another reading, and while in the trance state, Edgar Cayce told the patient that he needed to contact a pharmacist in, I believe it was Louisville. So the patient contacted the pharmacist and requested the bottle of oil of smoke, and once again the pharmacist told the patient they had no idea what this substance was. The third time Edgar Cayce had to go under, he informed the pharmacist that he needed to go to such and such shelf on such and such a area of the pharmacy and look behind several other bottles. When the pharmacist went back there and had a look, sure enough, he found a bottle of something called oil of smoke. The patient used this treatment and his ill was removed. Surprisingly, it seemed as if Edgar Cayce knew more about pharmacy than the pharmacist. Not too bad for a photographer. Then there was the other treatment. A man had broken his arm. The doctors were incapable of setting the bone. They tried their best, but no matter what they did, the bone refused to line up and stay that way. They turned to Edgar Cayce and asked for his advice. While in the trance state, Edgar Cayce told them they needed to get a finish nail, then sterilize it. They were to take the nail and insert it into a part of the bone, and then attach the other bone to the nail. That's what doctors use today when they pin a broken bone. At that time, no one had ever dreamed of such a thing, and yet Edgar Cayce was able to come up with this bizarre and off-the-wall treatment for broken bones. His remedies began to come under scrutiny of the American Medical Association, and Cayce felt that it was time to legitimize the operation with the aid of licensed medical practitioners. So in 1925, Cayce reported while in a trance, the voice had instructed him to move to Virginia Beach, Virginia, across the street from the beach. He was informed that the sand crystals would have curative properties to promote rapid healing. Sometime around this year, Cayce also, in an effort to make a little extra money to pay for his medical facility, came to Texas for a time in an effort to look for oil. The deal was half of the profits would be used to open a hospital. Well, the oil deal fell through when the men in charge tried to cut out the charitable contributions. Try as he might, Edgar Cayce was never able to find oil as long as these men refused to play ball with him. In Cayce's mature period, in which he created several institutions that would survive him, can be considered to have started in 1925. By this time he was a professional psychic with a small number of employees and volunteers. The readings increasingly came to involve occult and esoteric themes. Money was extremely scarce no matter what they tried. But help came from interested persons. The idea of an association in a hospital with such bizarre inclinations was somewhat of a new idea. But the readings insisted on Virginia Beach, which was not suited to a lot of people. Gertrude began to conduct all of the readings. Morton Blumenthal, a young man who worked in the stock exchange in New York, became very interested in the readings, and he shared Cayce's outlook, offered to finance the vision in the right spot. The right spirit. He bought them a house in Virginia Beach. On May 6th, 1927, the Association of National Investigations was incorporated in the state of Virginia. This would manage building the hospital and a scientific study of the readings. Morton was president, and his brother and several others were vice presidents. Edgar was the secretary and treasurer, and Gladys was assistant secretary. In order to protect against legal prosecution, the rules required any person requesting a reading to become a member of the association and agree they were participating in an experiment in psychic research. Early in 1928, Dr. Moseley Brown, head of the psychology department at Washington and Lee University, became convinced of the readings and joined the association. October 11, 1928, the dedication ceremony for the hospital complex were held. It contained a lecture hall, a library, a vault for storage of the readings, and offices for research workers. There was also a large living room, a 12-car garage, servants' quarters, and a tennis court. It contained the largest lawn, in fact the only lawn, between Cavalier and Cape Henry. The first patient was admitted the next day. This facility would enable consistent checking and rechecking of the remedies, which was Cayce's goal. There were consistent remedies for many of the illnesses, regardless of the patient, and Cayce hoped to produce a compendium that would be used by the medical profession. A distinguished chemist, Dr. Sunker Beasley, Ph.D., who also used the psychic knowledge to produce medications, collaborated with Cayce to produce automidine, an absorbable form of iodine, which was perfected and sold. There was a waiting list of months, people waiting to get a reading from Edgar Cayce. Blumenthal and Dr. Brown went ahead with ambitious plans for a university as a supplement to the hospital and a parallel service for the mind and spirit. In fact, it was to dwarf the hospital and rival other universities in respectability before psychic studies would begin. It was to open on September 22nd, 1930. On September 16th, Blumenthal called a meeting of the association, resulting in his ownership of the hospital to curb expenses. After the first semester, he ceased his support of the university, and on February 26, 1931, closed down the association. Cayce removed the files of the readings from the hospital and took them all home. During the Depression years, Cayce turned his attention to spiritual teachings. 1931, Edgar Cayce's friends and family asked him how they could become psychic like him. Out of his seemingly simple question came an 11-year discourse that led to the creation of study groups. From his altered state, Cayce relayed to this group that the purpose of life is not to become psychic, but to become a more spiritually aware and loving person. Study group number 1 was told that they could bring light to the waiting world, and that these lessons would still be studied 100 years into the future. The readings were now about dreams, coincidences, developing intuition, karma, the Akashic records, astrology, past life relationships, soulmates, and other esoteric subjects. Hundreds of books have been published about these readings. June 6, 1931, 61 people attended a meeting to carry on the work and form a new organization, which was to be called the Association for Research and Enlightenment. In July, the new association was incorporated, and Cayce legally returned to the home to Blumenthal, and he bought another home. Hugh Lynn, Cayce's son, proposed that they develop a stock in trade rather than something grandiose, and they build up a library of research into the phenomenon and hold study groups, and that Cayce was to do 2 readings per day. This was accepted by the association, and Hugh Lynn also started a monthly bulletin for the members of the association, which contained readings in general interest subjects, interesting cases, book reviews on psychic subjects, health hints from readings, and news of psychic phenomena in other fields. Hugh Lynn narrowed the mailing list to some 300 members who were genuinely enthusiastic and as a result, the first annual Congress of the association was held in June 1932. He procured speakers on various metaphysical and psychic subjects, and included public readings by Cayce. Members left the conference eager to start study groups in their own locations. Records were kept of everything that went on in the readings, including the attitudes and routines of Cayce. Everything was then checked with the subject of the reading, most of whom were not present during the reading, and the data was published in a study entitled 100 Cases of Clairvoyance. However, the response from scientists in general was that none of the experiments were performed under test conditions. Hugh Lynn continued to build files of cases, histories, parallel studies in psychic phenomena, and research readings for the study groups. The activities of the association remained unpublicized and unostentatious. Members raised a building fund for an office, library, and a vault, which were erected in 1940 and 41, as a single unit that was added to the Cayce residence. We will pause now for a brief set of commercials. You are listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Itterby Day, Suite number 7. And don't worry, there's plenty of parking at this new location. Not a coffee drinker? They have hot tea, hot chocolate with coconut, and other drinks if that's what you'd prefer. Stop on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop. It's a great place to meet your friends and have a cup of coffee or just curl up in a corner and read a book. 1002 Itterby Day, Suite number 7. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed those brief commercials. Now, this new facility that they had erected, there was no sign that would guide visitors to the center. The members of the association was averaging about 500 or 600 a year. The turnover from year to year was approximately half of this total. The other half remained a solid basis for the research work, an audience for case studies, pamphlets, bulletins, and the Congress Bulletin, which was a combined yearbook and record of the Congress events. There was also a mailing list of several thousand people who remained interested in Cayce's activities. Members were drawn from just about every church in the United States and a few that were far away. Cayce's philosophy was, if it makes you a better member of your church, then it's good. If it takes you away from your church, it's bad, regardless of which church you belong to. The philosophy of the readings was that true is one. Each organization is part of this one. Therefore, the A.R.E. was not to function as a schism or an opposition to any religious organization. The goal of the work was not something new, but something ancient and universal. Both sons entered the armed forces during the war. They had both married, and Hugh Lynn in 1941 and Edgar Evans in 1942. In March of 1943, the first edition of the only biography written during Cayce's lifetime by Thomas Sugrue was published. As a consequence, the public demand increased. The office force had to be increased, and the mailman could no longer carry all the mail. So now, Gertrude had to drive down to the post office to pick up the mail every day. Hugh Lynn was away in the forces, and Edgar coped with the letters and increased his readings from 4 to 6 per day. And Cayce gained national prominence in 1943 after the publication of a high-profile article in the magazine Coronet titled Miracle Man of Virginia Beach. World War II was taking its toll on American soldiers, and Edgar felt he could not refuse the families who requested help for their loved ones who were missing in action. He increased the frequencies of his readings to 8 per day to try to make a dent in the ever-growing pile of requests. He said this took a toll on his health, as it was emotionally draining and often fatigued him. The readings themselves scolded him for attempting too much, and that he should limit his workload to just 2 life readings a day, or else these good efforts would eventually kill him. It was as if the spirit inside him, doing the readings, was worried Cayce was working too hard. From June 1943 to June 1944, 1,385 readings were taken. By August 1944, Cayce had collapsed from the strain. When he gave a reading on the situation, the instructions were to rest until he recovered or he died. He and Gertrude went away to the mountains of Virginia, but September, Edgar Cayce suffered a stroke, and by January 3rd, 1945, he'd buried in Riverside Cemetery in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Gertrude only lasted 3 months after him, and then joined him in the grave. After the death of the Cayces, the association stopped the work of classifying and cross-referencing the 14,000 files of readings that had been taken throughout Cayce's lifetime, from March 31st, 1901 to September 17th, 1944. The result of these have been disseminated through the association publication with the members as the recipients of this material. Now, the majority of Edgar Cayce's readings deal with holistic health and the treatment of illness, as it was at the time Cayce was giving readings. Still today, individuals from all walks of life and belief receive physical relief from illnesses or ailments through information given in those readings. Some readings were given as far back as 100 years ago. Yet, although best known for his material, the sleeping Cayce did not seem to be limited to concerns about the physical body. In fact, in their entirety, the readings discuss an astonishing 10,000 different topics. Cayce's readings can be sorted into 5 main groups: health-related information, philosophy and reincarnation, dreams and dream interpretations, ESP and psychic phenomena, and spiritual growth, meditation, and prayer. If you'd like to read more about Edgar Cayce beyond the normal life, check out There Is a River by Thomas Sugrue, available in hardback, paperback, or audiobook version from Amazon.com. Even though it was written in 1942, it's still a fascinating and enthralling book. I've read it, and I highly recommend if you are interested in Edgar Cayce, pick up a copy today. It will amaze you. Cayce believed in reincarnation once his inner self had convinced him. Today, so many people contact the A.R.E. claiming to be the reincarnated Cayce, they have a form letter that they'll send out. You simply fill in the squares, trying to convince them that you are the reincarnated Edgar Cayce. However, the people at the A.R.E. are very thoroughly convinced that if Edgar Cayce is reincarnated today, he would not try to contact them. More than likely, he would choose another route of using his amazing abilities, but he wouldn't be sending them a letter saying, "Hey, I'm back." Members of the Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment have access to the entire set of 14,306 readings in a database located in the members-only section of their website. Now, how do you become a member? You simply go to edgarcayce.org and sign up. They do charge an initial fee. It's not a whole lot. But if you don't have the money, sometimes, depending on the person, they have been known to let people join for free. If you type in A.R.E.org, you wind up going to some German site. So be sure and type in edgarcayce.org. EDGARCAYCE.org. The game Pit is still available from Amazon.com, but Edgar Cayce's name is not given any credit for its creation. Now, Edgar Cayce was an intuitive healer, but he was still considered to be a prophet. He did make a few predictions about the future as well as discoveries from the past. 1924, Cayce predicted the crash of the stock market after a long bull run during the late 1920s. He could have made a ton of money by using his abilities to invest, but Cayce never used his abilities for personal gain. 1932, he predicted the world would go to war sometime in the 30s. 1936 was the beginning of World War II. Also in 1932, Cayce advised the Jews to regard the advent of fascist anti-Semitism in Europe as the time to fulfill the biblical prophecy which foretold that the Jews would return to Israel. May of 1948, the nation of Israel was reestablished just as Cayce had predicted. This was followed by a war between Israel and the Arab countries around it. January 1934, Cayce had predicted that Hitler would rise in power to reign over Germany. In August 1935, Cayce predicted that Hitler would remain in power until it will come as an overthrow or an outside war. And Cayce predicted a strong religious movement would come out of Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. 1991, the fall of the Soviet Union and atheistic communism occurred, as Cayce had predicted. The resulting freedom to practice religion released a flood of Russian spirituality. Cayce foresees the widespread destruction in Los Angeles and San Francisco, as well as many portions of the West Coast. Earth changes will occur in the central portion of the United States as well. There's a lot of dialogue that Cayce had pertaining to this event, but due to the fact that his unconscious self was speaking, it is a bit hard to read. I'll just give you the bird's eye view of it. According to Edgar Cayce, not because of global warming, but because of a magnetic pole shift on the planet, Oregon, Washington State, and California would all be submerged. Spokane, Washington would now have beachfront property. The Great Lakes would combine to become one giant lake, and instead of flowing to the east, as they do now, their water would flow to the south through the Mississippi River, which would broaden considerably. San Antonio would now be almost on the bank of the Mississippi, as well as Dallas. All the land from there to where the Mississippi River is today would be submerged. The very southern tip of Florida would disappear. Maine would all but vanish under the waves. and New York City and all the land around it would disappear as well. As I said, this was not due to global warming. Edgar Cayce believed that this would be due to a pole shift, causing the planet to change its current location. Well, I hope you've enjoyed tonight's stories, tonight's discussion of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, one of the most unusual men to ever be born in the United States. Next week, we're going to be talking about Nikola Tesla. Although he was not born in the United States, he did come here and prove to be another very strange individual. So tune in next week, August 20th, and hear about Nikola Tesla and some of his otherworldly ideas. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?